Third inning, 2 outs, up by 5-0. If you don't know what I'm talking about, then don't worry about it. Because you know, I love baseball. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Town Hall. I'm Darrell Chan. I'm the chairman of Town Hall. We have just a wonderful celebration tonight. I'll start with birthdays. We have Celia Ko, Tomoe Kawasaki, Joyce Forgatch right here. Woo-hoo! Bennett Cow. I didn't see him earlier. You can wish Bennett a happy birthday when you see him. Wu-chan right here. Happy birthday. Sylvia Huey. Nope. Juyu Liu and Mabel Wong. If you see them around town, just wish them a wonderful, wonderful happy birthday. We were going to have introduce the Watkins tonight, but we can just wish them condolences, wish the Watkins family their condolences, if you would, when you see them. Okay. There will be an announcement. I was talking with some friends recently. Oh, first of all, let me thank our greeters. I'm sorry, we have Gail and Jean. In the back, we have Stephen Walker. Casey Jones is back, and his lovely wife Shirley is here tonight. We have Joe Wright and Steve Whitford. Thank you, guys. Thank you for. You make me look and sound good. So, I happened to be talking to some friends recently about, I've been married 43 years. I know it's not that long compared to some of you, but 43 years, and we were talking about with some friends about our relationships. And I remember a story. In the early stages of Hilda and my relationship, I thought things were going well. Guys, we just think everything's great. So I don't know why, but I asked Hilda, am I the only one in your life? She kind of hesitated, and she looked at me. Yes, you're the only one in my life. So I smiled, and inside I'm thinking, yeah, right, I'm the only one. And she looks at me and she goes, what are you smiling for? All the other guys were 9s and 10s. Oh, wow. Now this, we have a wonderful, wonderful show tonight. The guy who's coming up, I don't think he dated Hilda, but he's definitely a 10 in a lot of our lives. This man, and most of you know him, some of you don't, but this man is just an amazing, amazing person. Worked here at Atherton for many years, turned this place around. We literally were on the brink of going under, and I can't say that strongly enough. And he did turn us around. And so he's going to come and share a little bit of what he's been doing since he's left Atherton. Now, you don't know, probably a lot of you don't know this part of what he has been doing since he left, but think about this as you're listening to his presentation. I think at one point when he got home, his wife, Chrissy, got totally pissed at him. You know how it is, women. We're guys. We do dumb things. And she told him, get out of here. Go take a hike. And being the great guy that Craig is, he took that to heart. Now, you guys may not know what that means, but when he's speaking, think about that when it comes up. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce and reintroduce to all of you the former mayor of Atherton, Mr. Craig Staton.
Daryl, I want you to know you've always been a 2 in my book. Good evening. Good evening. It is so great to see your faces. Yeah. So, for those that don't know, I was at Atherton for 12 years. I spent 2 years as Director of Development, and I spent a decade as the CEO of this marvelous, wonderful community. And I fell in love with you. And I am so happy to be back here and share with you a little bit. So when I got ready to come back, Daryl called me and he said, I want you to come, and when the Dodgers are playing, I want you, because I love Dodger baseball, I want you to talk about retirement, okay? So I'm not going to tell you anything about retirement you don't know. But what I'm going to do is tell you a little bit about what I've been doing this last year. So immediately, I began working on this, and then a lady from Atherton texted me and said, you want to play the piano? And I said, sure. And so she gave me the song, and so I tried to kind of get up to speed, and so we're going to play a little song for you. So Fanny, come on, let's give it a try.
Okay, I guess taking a hike wasn't far enough, and keep that in mind again. But I think the wife told him, just get off this planet. They're going to play Fly Me to the Moon.
We make a mistake, it's hit us.
thing about jazz is it has a lot of dissonance, so you didn't know that I missed the notes. So I have been retired as of tomorrow 1 year. I left Atherton at the end of September last year, and so I get to come back and share with you a little bit. And so I want to tell you a little bit about the transition and change for retirement. So first of all, I really kind of didn't want to retire. I loved working. But I did not like living away from my wife. We'd done that for about a decade. And I decided that I really needed to get back home if I wanted to have a marriage. And so then we kind of stepped into that. The other thing that I kind of realized was I was slipping just a little bit. Not a lot, but I wasn't quite as focused. Didn't have the diligence to follow through on stuff. And I just knew better to leave early, better to leave when things are going well than to wait until there's a problem. And so I set out, I turned in my papers and everything and started retiring. And so I've been doing what a lot of retired people do. I've been traveling. And I have been traveling wonderfully a lot of places. It was fun, and we just had a great time we had a great time in South Africa. So I decided that I would walk what was called the Camino Santiago. And so I walked 500 miles in 35 days. So this is the route. I started way over here. I started in a place called Roncesvalles. Traditionally, you start the Camino in France, in Saint-Jean-Pierre-Paul. But the first day you climb up over the Pyrenees and then down into Roncesvalles. And it's absolutely the most difficult day of the whole hike. And I decided I didn't want my first to be my last. And so I took a break from there, and I started over here and went all the way to Santiago, which was 500 miles. It was truly, absolutely wonderful. Met so many wonderful people. So my granddaughter said to me when I started, she said, "Papa, why do you want to walk 500 miles? And I said, well, I want to listen. And I heard, while I was on the walk, I heard three things. I heard myself say to myself, you've had a wonderful life. You've been greatly blessed. God has given you so much. You've had wonderful parents. You've had a wonderful education. You've had opportunities to do meaningful service. You've gained a measure of economic wealth in this life. You haven't been plagued by disease. You've had no major dramas or disasters in your life. And I had to say over and over again to God, thank you. I've had marvelous life. Deeply blessed. Second thing that I heard is from others, and what I heard was some of them have. Some of them have had a very difficult life, difficult things. So there was one gentleman I was sitting eating dinner with, and the standard question when you're on the Camino is, why are you on the Camino? Everybody answers that. You meet people from all over the world. This guy was from Ireland, and so I said, why are you on the Camino? He said, well, I've decided that I'm going to walk to honor my wife and my son. I said, oh, really? He said, yes. He said, when my son was about ready to graduate from college, he contracted a very fast-moving and a fatal disease. And he died right before he was ready to graduate from college. He was our only son. And he said, my wife was devastated by that. And almost 2 months later, she decided to commit suicide just out of all the pain. And so he said, I'm walking the Camino because she told me before she left that I ought to do this. And I'm walking that to honor her. There were a lot of people that were walking because of grief, loss, hurt. There was a young woman from South Korea that I talked to her, and I asked her, and she said, well, my mom has just died, and I was very close to my mom. I said, oh, really? She said, yeah, and she said, and I don't get along with my dad very well. And what I found out was that she was an accountant, her dad was an accountant, and they were working together. And Mama was the buffer was gone. And she was trying to decide what she wanted to do with the rest of her life because she wasn't about to go back and do this. And so when you go along the Camino, you meet people who are doing different kinds of things in different kinds of ways, but they're looking to this long walk to heal something in their souls. And it was absolutely fascinating. I had wonderful conversations with people, got to pray with some people, talk to them, but the Camino was a place of prayer. For some, it was a place for partying, for others. So the Irish go on the Camino to party. I've decided that. But it was really good. And then the third thing I heard from God, the third thing, so one was from myself, that you're blessed. The second thing was from others, and there's a lot of pain and suffering and heartache. And the third thing was from God. And what I heard from God is follow Jesus. Follow Jesus. Those simply like that. And as a result of that, I've started reading the Gospels every month. I read all 4 Gospels every month. I concentrate on those. And in fact, I'm tempted to go to every pastor and tell them, just preach from the Gospels. Talk about Jesus. Because in a broken world, we need to hear what Jesus has to say. I don't need to hear. In fact, I'm doing that just simply because I don't need to hear what you tell me Jesus said. I need to actually read what Jesus said. And I've found that to be a great comfort and a challenge in kind of a turbulent time, if you will. At least for me, it seems like a turbulent time in my young life. So anyway, so that was the Camino. These are pictures. This picture was taken after I'd been in the rain for 6 hours. And you know when you get a raincoat and I had a poncho on and you get all that stuff, if you're out in the rain for 6 hours, none of it works. I was just wet. These are other places. You can see my beard got a little bit longer, and here I am. This is Santiago, and that's the Cathedral of Santiago, and I made it, and wonderful, joyous days. Met some wonderful people along the way. But that was a great trip. I had a wonderful time with that, and if you ever want to know, I can tell you a lot more, although I've bored way too many people with that. So the next thing that we did was, after I went to Santiago, then my wife didn't want to walk that far. She doesn't believe that walking is the main form of transportation she wants to partake in. And so we decided that we would meet in Paris. Never been to Paris in my life. Over here we're at Versailles, the Seine, and the Arc de Triomphe. We were there, and we just had a wonderful time there and enjoyed it immensely. So then came back. And then my wife and I celebrated our 40th anniversary, and she informed me we were taking the whole family to Hawaii for our 40th anniversary. I said, they're going to join us? She said, no, we're taking them. We're writing all the checks for all of them. Ooh. When she told me that, I thought I may continue to work. But we had a great time in Hawaii, and this is all of my family. I now have 7 grandchildren. My first grandchild was born when I just became the CEO of Atherton. That's little Cozy, right here. And now there's 6 others, and there's one more on the way. Mel, who is my son's wife, is pregnant, and we're supposed to have another one in December. So we'll have 8 grandchildren at Christmas. So anyway, that's my, so for those that don't know, this is my youngest daughter, Marissa, and that's her husband, Mark, and these are their 2 kids. That's my wife, Christine. This is Kelly and her husband, Jordan, and these are her kids right here. And then this is my son, James, and this is Mel, and this is little JJ. So that's my family. We put them all together. And it really was a wonderful time, and I was so happy to get home and rest. You put all those little kids running around all at the same time. Oh, Chrissy said, why do you get up every morning and go out on the lanai and just drink coffee? Stealing up for the day. So anyway, so that was fun. I have one more trip this year. In a couple more weeks, we're going with a group of people to South Africa, and we're going on a photography tour. So anyway, I've been traveling lots. We're having lots of fun traveling. It's been a great opportunity for us. So we're very thankful for that. Second thing, I have become acquainted with doctors. Any retired people know their doctor by the first name basis now? You know, I didn't go to doctors very much. I was busy running a community. But when I got back, my wife said, well, you know, let's kind of get some baselines and do some things. So I started going to doctor. I've had 2 wisdom teeth removed. Yeah, the teeth had deteriorated pretty good, and the doctor said, actually I was supposed to have those quite a while ago removed. I'd had another dentist who had diagnosed those, and then a little thing called COVID happened. And I never had them out then, and so they were pretty well deteriorated. And so anyway, I got those out. I've been to all sorts of doctors to check different kinds of things. My doctor told me, I went into his office, and he told me, Mr. Staton, I want to tell you that you're pre-diabetic. I said, really? He said, yep. And he says, you need to get a hold of this, and you need to get a hold of this now. And so as a result of that, I've changed my diet a little bit, lost a little bit of weight, trying to kind of get everything back in line. I went and saw a dermatologist, and they checked a couple spots, and they said, you've got a little spot there that's melanoma, and we need to take that, get that clipped out. And so anyway, I've got a nice little scar right along here. We clipped out. Doctors are wonderful people. What's not wonderful is insurance companies. And I've been back and forth and going, egads. So I am now in your world, folks. Having the time of my life. But doctors have been a part of my life now and that. And you know, that's just part of what happens. As we get a little bit older, we have to do that. We try and watch all those things, and if we stay as healthy as we can for as long as we can, we live as well as we can. And so that's part of what I've been doing. So that's been a part of it. The other thing, so Atherton has been kind enough to ask me to do some work for them. And so for the last several months this year, I have started working on doing some stuff to update some of the history files. So last year in 2024, Atherton celebrated its 110th anniversary. And at the 110th anniversary, some of you may have seen this. There are more of these books available. This is called A Bright Spot on the Horizon. This is the history of Atherton from 1914 to 2004. And we still have those. Some of you may have them. I think you could probably get one if you wanted one. But it's a wonderful history of how Atherton developed, grew, all of these kinds, and all of those kinds of things. But here's the thing that this doesn't tell you. It doesn't tell you about youth, about the people who have lived at Atherton. And I decided in the 110th year, I thought I'd like to write a book that says 110 people for 110 years. And I'd like to take 110 people who have lived at Atherton and tell their story. I didn't get that done. I got the list made, I got it all planned out, but I didn't get that done. And so for the last several months, I've been working on the stories of residents who have lived at Atherton in the anticipation of writing that book to get that and get that published and have that to be a companion to this. Because I don't think you can really understand the mission, the nature of who this community is and what it intended and what it's been without understanding the people who have lived here. And so that's been a big part of that. So I've done a part of this. I want you to see this. So in 1955, there was a gentleman that joined the staff by the name of Mr. Philpotts, or Reverend Philpotts. Reverend Philpotts was the first marketing agent that Atherton had ever had. He was actually a retired minister, and he had worked back in Chicago and done a lot of work in publicity and fundraising and development all over the place. But he came to Atherton and he began to write. And he began to write these little brochures that are called the Atherton Reporter. And we've got almost all of them. They're in our archives. We've got almost all of them. And in 1961, he wrote one of these about retired missionaries who lived at Atherton. In 1961, there were 43 missionaries that were living at Atherton. And out of that, and so I started from there. And what I want to do, he wrote a paragraph on each one of these people, okay? And I decided I wanted to write at least a page. I wanted to know why they got into the mission, where they went, what they did, all of those kinds of things. I wanted to see if I could trace the history of them, and I wanted to know if I could find a picture of all them. This is the picture he had in there, and I can't tell you who these people are without finding other pictures and doing that. And so that's been my challenge. It's been part of my challenge. I'm gonna want to tell you tonight a little bit about a few of these people, and I want to tell you a little bit about some of the other people and a little bit about their stories of Atherton, and I think you'll understand what makes this place special. Corey has said to me over and over again that Atherton is holy ground. And I believe that. And after I've read these stories, I really believe that is true. That the men and women who have lived here have affected the gospel in the 20th century in an incredible way. And this is very hallowed ground for men and women who follow Jesus. And that's why Atherton exists and continues to exist today. And so I want to show you a few of these, show you a little bit about, and tell you a little bit about that. By the way, just real quick, this lady's a lady by the name of Flora Ernest. Flora was a missionary who went from America into the Philippines and actually developed a nursing program at a town in the Philippines, Iloilo, I think it's Iloilo, Philippines. Iloilo, in the Philippines. So one of her first students was a lady by the name of Ruth Tupas. Ruth Tupas was a resident of Atherton, teacher and student. And Ruth passed away. She was still doing nursing in our skilled nursing when I came here. She was a volunteer, but once a nurse, always a nurse. And she was volunteering and going in and feeding people and helping out with all the nursing there. So very, very special to see that and see that legacy in there. This is mother and daughter, Hilda Smith and Maggie Smith. And they both lived at Atherton. And we've had some of those. So anyway, let me tell you a few quick stories, and then I'll call it a night. So this is the first resident of Atherton. Actually, the first couple. They came to Atherton in 1915 when it was in Burbank, when there weren't many people, and they were employed by the conference to take care of the building until more people came. His name is George Ballantyne. Okay? Now, the interesting thing about George Ballantyne is from 1903 to 1905, George Ballantyne was the pastor of the Selma First Baptist Church in Selma, California, John. John, Evie, and I both pastored that church, and so did George. George was a caretaker here. He was caretaker in Burbank, and he actually planted a bunch of fruit trees because they had about 5 acres and the building didn't take up. He planted fruit trees, and they used to have cars that would come from LA to Burbank and pick up fruit to take to ministers and missionaries in the city from the fruit trees he'd planted. He was 66 when he started his retirement job. And he lived there for several years. This is his wife. I can't remember. Winifred. Now, Winifred, so George grew up in Canada. And who wooed? All right. So there were a lot of early Athertonians that started in Canada. Really interesting. Went to Andover Newton Seminary, and then in the first part of the 20th century, made his way slowly west, doing churches all the way until he finally got to California. In Selma, he went to Selma for 3 years, 03 to 05, and then he went to Modesto First Baptist Church and pastored there. His first wife passed away when he was in Modesto. And he met Winifred. And he was 59 at the time, and she was 30. Her mom and dad all became, later followed up and were pastors of the Modesto First Baptist Church, the Sanders family. And they moved down, so 7 years later, they moved down to LA. He started doing this. She followed. They never had any children. Then her parents followed her down. Her father and her first mother were the first residents of Atherton that actually passed away in a senior living community. But they were the first ones. And they were a part of that. They stayed, he kind of did the outside work, but she was kind of the caretaker of the people who lived at Atherton. And they stayed there until Atherton closed in Burbank in 1923, and then she moved to Glendale with her husband, and they lived in Glendale. They didn't come to Atherton at that time. They lived in Glendale. Mr. Ballantyne passed away, or Reverend Ballantyne passed away in 1927, and then Mrs. Ballantyne came back to Atherton here on the campus in Alhambra and was a caretaker for many more years. And I believe she died, I want to say this. Yeah, did I put it up there? Boy, I'm good. Thank you. I need to read my own slides. So she lived a long time here on this campus. And one of the reasons that we know as much about the early days of Atherton is because she actually wrote a letter in the 50s, 1955, about what life was like in the early days of Atherton. There wasn't a lot of information about that, but she wrote this letter about that and did that. And so but those are the first residents, the first caretaker, and they lived their lives of that. So Atherton has a tradition of caring for ministers and missionaries who are on the field. Okay, so you come back and you do furlough and you can stay at Atherton, and we've done that for years and years and years. These are the first missionaries that came to Atherton on furlough. They came in 1920. It was Frederick and Dr. Martha Bradshaw. And they were in West China. They served in West China. He left in 1903 to go to West China. So the journey in 1903 to get to West China was arduous, very difficult. You know, you went up the Yangtze River. Do you know the Yangtze River is about as long as it runs from Utah to New York? The river's that long. And they had to go up the river, and you took the steamship up, and then you got on a houseboat, and you went up, and then after you got the houseboat, then you had to hike to your place. It took him almost 6 months to get to the city that he was to serve. He was the only missionary there to serve, and he lasted for 2 years, and then the Boxers' Rebellion came, and he had to flee for his life. Okay? Came back to the United States, and during that time did some preaching around and happened to meet Martha. And so they got married, and then they headed off and headed back to Western China. After their first service, they came back in 1920, and it was in 1920 that they stayed in the Atherton Villa in Burbank as missionaries with their 3 little kids. And they stayed there, and Atherton took care of them for a season. And then Mrs. Bradshaw stayed in the United States, and Dr. Bradshaw went back. And he served for many more years as a missionary, and then came back again. They ended up living in San Francisco. They never came back to Atherton, but they were always close to the First Baptist Church of Los Angeles. But Atherton did a service to them, just like it's done to many missionaries, by having them stay. And it's a wonderful story. She was a medical doctor. He was a Baptist preacher, and he provided the spiritual needs, and she provided the physical needs. And interestingly enough, she tells a story of having to do surgery by candlelight. That's what life was like at that particular time for those early missionaries. Quite amazing. Dr. Bradshaw was very revered, and there are other missionaries who are of the 43 that I talk about that met him, that lived at Atherton and met him, and one of them, Reverend Jensen, said he was one of the finest men and finest missionaries he'd ever met in his life. And he trained him to do missions there in West China. It was just, so there's interesting stories of how these folks intersect, if you will. Those are the Bradshaws. So this is the first building that was built on this campus. It's right across here. Okay? It's called the Limes campus. And Reverend Limes lived here between 1936 and 1948, and I forgot to put, Harriet came with him. Harriet was his third wife. He lost 2 wives and 2 children to death. But he was the first one that came to Atherton and said, you have this property. He said, if I sell my house in Pasadena and give it to Atherton, will you build me a place to live? And that is what they built, this right here, this duplex right here. I believe the house was worth $7,000, and they were able to build that for $7,000. And it's still standing. And so it's really quite amazing and quite remarkable to do that. But he was the first one. There were a lot of those. A lot of these buildings that are over here were built by the gifts of residents. So in the early days of Atherton, when they came here, people would say, if I give money to Atherton, will you build me a unit? And so that's what many of them, some of them were $10,000, $15,000, something like that. You had no monthly fee. Ah, the good old days. But Atherton had to exist based upon those fees and the generous donations of people all those early years that they were doing that. And so it was called life tenancy, and what you did was you basically paid for your unit and then you got to live there on campus. There were no social services. Well, you didn't, you took care of your own food, you took care of your own nursing. It wasn't until in 1935, maybe 45, that Atherton actually had a nurse on campus for the very first time, Mrs. Milner. And but up till that point, they had nobody. It had a superintendent who kind of watched over things, helped get things built, but as a whole, there were no other services. They didn't provide food. They didn't do anything. You just got a place to stay. And so that was a part of that. But that was the very first one, Mr. Lyman. And like his wheels? Pretty good looking, huh? He was one of the early ones. Yeah. Yeah, pretty good. So this is Alice Stinger. Alice was an early missionary to India. They served in India from 1910 to 1924. And she was the third person. Her husband passed away, and she was the third person who had a building built in his honor right out here. It's the other side of the Limes unit. It's right there. They were one of the ones that, and I've got another story to tell you about this, but they were one of the ones that fell in love and got married and went on the mission field. It was that quick. It was that quick. And there she is with their 3 kids. This is the wedding photo that they had. And then here she is in, I believe this picture's taken in 50. And there she is with a group of others. This is Mrs. Valentine. This is Mrs. Stater. And so interesting who all these people are. This is Dr. Kerry Willett. He lived to be 100. He was one of the oldest living pastors that ever lived here, and one of the early pastors who was here. And on his 100th birthday, he preached. He preached in a sermon, and they said that his voice was strong. So anyway, that's another part of that. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about some of the places of Atherton. So how many of you heard of Brimson Gardens? Okay. Brimson Gardens right out here is in honor of a lady by the name of Alice Brimson. Alice Brimson was quite a well-known figure in the middle of the 20th century for American Baptists. She was the former president of what's called the Baptist Missionary Training Society. And when I showed you this book of 43 missionaries, 19 of them had come through the Baptist Missionary Training School. American Baptists were one of the first denominations that trained women and put them in the field, even if they weren't married. Now, all of you know if you're a pastor's wife, you're being put in the field. You were volunteered when you married. But there were many women who heard the call, believed that God wanted them to go, and the Baptists developed these systems for them, and Alice was a part of that, and she led that organization. And then there was another arm that American Baptists used, which was the Women's American Baptist Home Mission Society, that put women in ministry all over the United States. And Alice was a part of that and ran that for a long time. So interestingly enough, it was because of Alice that so many of those women ended up at Atherton. They met one another at school. They served in ministry together. They supported one another. And when they got ready to retire, they came to Atherton because of that. And so Alice was very much a part of what this was. She lived at Atherton from 1963 to 1981. And it was just because of all that she had done that area out there, that garden area, is named Brimson Gardens. And we appreciate that very much to do that. So you are sitting today in what's called Miriam Chapel, and there's a picture of Mary Miriam right back here. So in the 1950s, Atherton decided that it needed a place where people could assemble and have activities. It had grown to the point where it needed a place like that. And so it said that it needed to build a building, a hall. This is basically what it is. This is basically what you're sitting in right here. That's how it looked when it was built. And the Miriam family said, we will help you do that. The cost of this building was $25,000. The Miriams gave $20,000. This building is not in honor of Mary. It's in honor of her brother, Henry. I don't know anything about Henry, other than Mary loved him. Okay? But that's what it is. Mary was a missionary to Cuba, and then she served and worked at a place called the Benedict College from 1921 to 1930. Benedict College was started by American Baptists to help black women coming out of the Second World War, to give them skills to make a living and live. And for many years she was there. And then when she came out to LA, she was part of a resident director of the American Baptist Seminary of LA, which primarily worked with Hispanic pastors for many years. And then she came to Atherton, lived here for many years. There's the picture of Mary. Tried to take a picture, and the light got real bad, so that's why her jaw looks so terrible there. Just turn and look at her there, okay? So the other thing that I wanted to show you is these windows here. You kind of are aware of these stained glass windows. These windows were a gift from a consortium of people, and they come from what's called the old Haggerty Mansion. Now, if you've been around LA, you might know. But this is what the Haggerty Mansion looked like in LA. Okay? And that is where the windows were. They were right behind the pipe organ that was in the house. And they came down, and when the castle was torn down, the windows were auctioned off. The consortium of people came and bought these two windows and donated them to Atherton. Mr. Haggerty, does anybody that's lived in LA ever remember Haggerty's? Okay. Haggerty's was a department store. It was like Macy's. It was like Bloomingdale's at least, but there was a place called Haggerty's, and it was very nice, well known, and then so now obviously it had the ravages of retail and didn't make it. But it was working well, and he was able to build a big house and put stained glass windows with an organ in it. And it was the place where Hollywood kind of hung out. It was very important. But that's why the chapel exists today. Chapel's been remodeled, as many of you know, many times, several times. But the basic structure is still the same it was when it was built in the 50s. And it continues to serve its purposes then. It was the Miriam Hall, and then about 5 years later, it was changed to Miriam Chapel, because the primary thing that we did was did worship. Now, I will say that there was a long time when they were doing worship, and then the floor was hard, and then they'd play shuffleboard right afterwards. Okay, so, all right. This is one of my favorite missionaries, Emma Broadbeck. Emma was a lifelong missionary to West China. So the others, the Bradshaws, West China. So she, in 1918, she went to West China and was there until 1959, multiple trips in and out of West China. And the reason that I say this is because right before the Japanese occupied China, West China, for many years. And she was forced out of there in 1939. And in 1940, she decided that she was ready to go back. But she couldn't get in through the front door, so she went to the back door. And the back door was called the Burma Road. And she was the first woman that ever traversed the Burma Road. She rode on basically an old truck all the way through, her and another lady who was a missionary, and they went about 700 miles. So they started from here, and they transversed. Yeah, you know, you remember the vehicles in the 1940s, don't you? Yeah, those were not, her front seat was a hard wooden bench. And the roads were not paved. And she traveled this, I think it took her 30-some days that they went all the way through, all the way along, and all the way to get to her home mission port, Sufi. So anyway, she was wonderful. And so she retired in 1959. And in 1960, no, maybe it was 64, wasn't it? John F. Kennedy. When was John F. Kennedy president? 62? Yeah, he announced a little program called the Peace Corps. Okay? And when he announced the Peace Corps, young people flocked to do that. And then they saw they had too many young people, and so they decided they needed some older people. And the oldest person to ever apply to the Peace Corps was a lady by the name of Emma Broadbeck. So I want to read you a little bit about this because it's just so fun. Emma, where'd you go here? So, at over 60, Emma formally retired from mission work. But Emma's story was far from over. In 1962, at the age of 69, she joined the newly formed Peace Corps, competing successfully with applicants nearly half her age. Though initially rejected as too old, she reapplied and was accepted to go through to the Philippines. She had been in the Philippines for a while. Her orientation was held in Hawaii, and the physical training regime was very challenging. Daily, she was required to run, do calisthenics, which included push-ups, sit-ups, jumping jacks, deep knee bends, and plus activities like horseback riding, swimming, canoeing, climbing, and biking. She said of the experience, run, run, run. Young people in shorts. We never wore shorts in China. In China, they didn't want to see too much meat. Oh my goodness. She lived at Atherton from 1970 to 1989. And there's lots of stuff that's written about her and stories, and I just tried to condense it all, but it's just wonderful. She passed away at 96 and lived as a part of this community, and so just a wonderful, wonderful lady. Just a couple more. So did you know that there was a Baptist preacher at Atherton that was quoted in Time magazine? This is Silas Thweet, Silas Thweet, who was at Atherton from 1948 to 1970, but in 1939 he served as the pastor of the San Pedro First Baptist Church. And the pastor of the San Pedro First Baptist Church got to do different kinds of services, chaplain services, at one of the most infamous prisons in the United States, which is just off there. And there was a guy there by the name of Al Capone. And so when he went to the prison, he decided that he would try and see if he could convert Al Capone. Now, there were others there and that kind of thing. And so the story in Time magazine is about him, the sermon that he preached, and all that he did. And here's what it says. Later, Mr. Thweet declared, at the close of the talk, Capone's face seemed to radiate. And when I asked those prisoners to stand who felt the need and will accept the Lord Jesus Christ as their Savior, he was the first to rise. That this conversion had taken place, no one doubted. Said the prison warden, sure, ministers do that all the time. And there are always 10 to 15 men who raise their hands and rise. I don't know whether they really mean it or not. Okay? But here's the catch-22. As a result of that, the warden never invited him back because he published it. And in Time magazine, this is what he said. If the government is going to spend so much money for a correctional institution, and if the religion of the Lord Jesus Christ is a correctional religion, then why should the news of an inmate accepting the religion be barred from the press and public knowledge? So anyway. And by the way, that's online, so you can find that and you can do that. So anyway, the last one I want to tell you about is, this is a couple. This is Albert and Abigail Boggs. And they served in India from 1908 to 1953 and lived at Atherton. And so one of the most interesting things about doing this and learning about all of these people who have lived here is hearing their stories. And so many of them fell in love and then went on the mission field together. They both felt called, and they decided that they would do missions together. But this one is especially interesting to me. Albert and Abigail. This is written by Mrs. Boggs in, I think it's 1960s. But she calls these events that happen in life serendipities. She says, the next serendipity occurred at 24. While leading a group of young people on a meeting, the subject was giving your best to God. While speaking, a driving voice within my conscience said, why don't you give your best? And my soul gave the answer, I do, here and now. So convincing was the voice that I went home that night and said, Mother, I'm going to be a missionary. She exclaimed, for that I dedicated you from birth. About face. I closed up my teaching and study in piano and went to the Baptist Missionary Training School in Chicago for training. In due course, graduation, appointment came, but not to India, where she thought she was going, to Burma instead. To this I acquiesced, and so with a group of 30 missionaries destined for India, Burma, and China, we set out from Boston in September of 1908. The ship was small and slow, taking 10 days to cross the Atlantic. Among those missionaries was a single young man, very attractive and dedicated, and destined for South India by the name of Albert Mackenzie Boggs. Naturally, we drifted together, you know, and by the time we docked in Southampton, England, we were engaged. 10 days from meeting, courtship, engagement. Okay? So from there, he went overland sightseeing, and I continued on to Rangoon, Burma. This sudden happy chance, the serendipity, caused great consternation at home. You can imagine, I've met the man I'm going to marry on a boat and abroad. But all is fair in love. So eventually we were married in Rangoon, Burma on December 11th, 1908. 4-day voyage across the Bay of Bengal to Madras, India, was our honeymoon. Now, this is the last thing. I need to tell you about Al. That's how she interpreted all these things. These are Albert's words. Miss A. Leonard of the Mission Society of the West has consented to go with me to work in India. That's it. Romance was in the air. So, well, it's been great to be with you and share with you. Like I say, this has just been such fun for me, and I just want you to know that that this community, you're a part of a great move of God. It's a very, very special place, and these are hallowed ground. The men and women who have walked here have served the Lord, made a difference in the lives of so many people for eternity. And you are just the next group that comes through. And we hope that by God's work that we will have many more groups to come. But thank you for being here. Thank you for that. I think that the book will be done in the first part of next year, and I hope to get it to you. So thank you again. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. Thank you, Craig. Hang on. You know, we are all here, and I truly mean this because of this wonderful man here. So let's give him another big round of applause, will we? Now it sounds like you're spending a lot of your money in retirement on going on family trips and things. So this may be the best thing you'll take away from Atherton on this trip. This is the current Atherton employment application here. You just fill your name out right here. I can write you a referral letter, but I'm only a 2, and it may not, be enough. But
She's a 10.
she's a 10. She's a 10, my friend.
But he's still a 1.
I tried to live.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us in Town Hall. God bless you all.